Hey students, this is Mr. Pfeiffer back with part 2 of genetic sequencing. And for this video, we have another 23andMe user. It is Mrs. Pfeiffer. And you can see how two people that are unrelated, what their DNA looks like. Obviously, the two DNA strands that you are looking at created our son and daughter. Thompson was on my video earlier with the first one. So you can listen to her heritage, listen to what Mrs. Pfeiffer has for genetic traits as well. I'm going to let her take it away. Mrs. Pfeiffer also, by the way, from professional status, is a biology teacher as well. She teaches in high school and is quite well qualified to talk about these subjects. Here we go.
Good morning, everybody. So let's just take a tour of my ancestry first, since you talked about Mr. Pfeiffer's ancestry. Now, mine is a little bit more unvariable. I have, let's see. The reason I actually did 23andMe, I did it before Mr. Pfeiffer, was because my mom was adopted and I didn't really have a lot of family history. So I kind of wanted to know where I came from. And so that was really the driving force in me choosing to do this. So I am very, very European. So most of my ancestors are French and German, and they recently have broken this down more into where most of my ancestors are from Flanders, Belgium, and Bavaria, Germany. This was something that was new to me. My maiden name is a Belgian name, so that was something that could have been. And then there's just a lot of information if you come in here. Let's go back. This is something that I did not know, and this is probably from my mother's side, is that she probably had a grandparent that was British and Irish. And so that we didn't know about. You can see that's a fairly high percentage. And you can scroll down and figure out where these were. So if you look, this British and Irish component probably lines up with either a one of my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents. And so because we had no history of that on my father's side, we figure it's probably from my mother's side. And so if you scroll down, you can kind of see where the parts of your background came from. And they can trace it back to how far away it was. So you can kind of figure out in your family tree where that came from. Now I want to show you some, and so these are some of the pieces of your chromosomes and where they come from. I'm going to go back to the beginning and show you something that's slightly different from what Mr. Pfeiffer has. I can't remember where it comes from. Oh, so these maternal haplogroups and paternal haplogroups. I have no paternal haplogroups because this would come from the Y chromosome, and because I have two X chromosomes, I do not have this report. So if I were to have a male relative fill this out, which I didn't, I could have more information, but because I don't have a Y chromosome, we can't trace my paternal haplogroup at all.
Remember, kids, females are XX and males are XY in our DNA.
Okay, so there's some things that I have. Now, when you have what they call variants, it'll come up on the health and traits report. And so these are variants that I have for these specific genetic disorders or genetic variations. And so this one is an interesting one. This is what we call the APUI gene. And so we're going to go in and look at what information they have. So I have one copy of one of the variants, which means I got one from one of my parents. I do have a history of Alzheimer's in my family on my father's side, so that wasn't necessarily a surprise. But this is what we call the APUI gene. And so they do have some legal jargon here saying they're not diagnosing me. It's a slight increase. And if you look at the scientific details of what this is, we can go in. Now you can download your entire genome off of this, which is just a list of your A's and G's and T's and C's, which is not super helpful unless you know exactly where all these chromosomes, these genes lie on the chromosomes, but it is an interesting component of 23andMe. Okay, so this just kind of shows you risks of Alzheimer's. development based on variants and which variants you have. And these are for no variants. I have one copy of the variant. And so there's a slight increased risk after age 85 of me developing what's called late onset Alzheimer's. Let's see. Where's the component that I want to see? Okay, there's a lot of information on this website. This is what I wanted to show you is when you look at the APOE gene, you have two alleles coming from each parent. And so the typical copy is the T. So in that place, there's a T, and that is what they consider the norm based on genetic sequencing. On one of my chromosomes, instead of having a T, it got switched to a C. And so that's what they call the variant marker. And it's a mutation because it's variant from what they say is the normal. And so that increase, that little letter change, that one letter change on that one chromosome means that I have a increased risk, a very slight increased risk of developing a certain genetic issue. Okay, and then the last thing I want to show you is my Neanderthal component because I am incredibly Neanderthal. And my interpretation is that because Neanderthals mostly lived, we found them really in Neander, Germany, which is where the name Neanderthal came from. And so because I am so heavily German in my ancestry, Belgium and German, so I have a lot of Neanderthal variants. And so I am technically higher than 92% of all the people that they test. So I'm very, very heavily Neanderthal. So if you look, Mr. Pfeifer had 298 variants. I have 10 more than him. And so some of these are the variations. Now, it's kind of interesting because I don't actually have all the variants they list. But because of all the genes that they look at, I am more heavily Neanderthal than Mr. Pfeifer and 92% more than most of the people that they've tested. I hope you enjoyed my information on 23andMe, and you can feel free to ask Mr. Pfeifer any questions that you might have.